Here somewhere.
In the West, the salad is called Olivier or Russian. Many of us don't call it that way.
Little bit more awake and wake up, and you have to take a look at the stars and look at the moon. No, you don't have to think. You have everything. You're a machine engineer.
Friday, the
The
brain rotates in the air. It hooks a tight-fitting rope around the monument. The sculpture breaks. The hook body oscillates, leaving two legs on the
Je comprends mieux
pedestal.
maintenant ce qui pousse
The
le
right
grand-père de
thumb
Stigvart à retourner en
gets
mer à ses
lost.
80 ans.
I'm obsessed with his figure. I'm watching and watching and watching.
C'est pas
And
juste
you're
un job,
chewing and chewing and chewing. You're expressing yourself
c'est une manière de
breathlessly,
se sentir vivant.
impatiently, hungrily,
À l'agenda moderne des
greedily,
24 sur 7
rebelliously,
s'oppose la notion du temps des
earnestly,
pêcheurs.
proudly,
Parce que
arrogantly.
dans l'imprévu de la nature, il faut attraper le
I'm
moment
looking at
propice
him
quand il se
endlessly.
présente. Il y a un bon moment pour tout,
So that
pour le
eventually he
poisson,
does not look real anymore.
pour jeter les filets et pour rentrer.
But actually,
c'est pas
maybe
toi qui
I
le
can
décides.
find him, and I do, and we speak.
Il faut jouir de ce qui s'offre à toi, sans rien
Sveiki.
attendre.
Ačiū, kad radot
On
laiko
est tellement
pakalbėti. Iš
différents du
tiesų,
monde qui nous entoure.
kaip ir rašiau savo žinutę, norėčiau su jumis pašnekėti apie tai, kas vyksta 91 metų rugpjūčio 23 dieną Vilniuje. Prisipažinsiu, kad jūsų figūra tame video man ikoniška. Atrodo, kad viename taške viskas susijungia. Dvi ideologijos.
J'aimerais
Viena,
voir Sigvart,
akivaizdžiai
fils de
krentanti
Trond.
priešais jūsų akis, komunistinė, o kita
J'aimerais en savoir plus sur la
tarsi
place que prend la pêche
nepastebima,
dans sa famille.
einanti per jūsų
Quelle valeur
kūną,
a-t-il hérité de la pêche
kapitalistinė.
et lesquelles veut-il perpétuer?
Tas paminklas, nu ir ne tik jis, bet ir dar ten buvo kažkokių tai biustų ant to žalio tilto, žinai. Jis tapusios buvo miesto širdimi, žinai, tai neatskiriama. Tarsi ten jis visada buvo ir kažko anksčiau galvot, kad tai ir bus amžinybė, visą ten tas slėnis ten toj lūkščių lėno aikštėje. Paminėtų buvo toks vienas šoks bendras darinys, bet jau baimės visiškai nebuvo jokio jausmo, kad kai jį nuiminėjo tą lėną, žinai, jau buvo aišku, kad jau jis nesugrįš ir pratęs ko gero jį.
O ta kramtoma guma, jinai iš kur? Juk tais laikais tai buvo gana dar deficitas ir toks delikatesas. Vakarietiško ir amerikietiško gyvenimo būdo simbolis. Iki 70-ųjų Sovietų sąjungoje ir nebuvo pradėta gaminti, bet net ir tada, kai buvo vakarietiška ir neprilygo, per švelni, per sunkiai pūsti burbulus, greitai prarasdavo skonį. Žodžiu, prasta.
Ta kramtoma guma, tai šiaip čia užsienyje.
Dilijos
vie de
žodžiais,
Sigvart
ji
en
yra
décrit la
pasakius kažką
continuité.
panašaus į autentišką nesąmoningų susirašinėjimų grandinę.
Tai išpakuoja ten tas lauktuves, ten visi susirenka giminės, ten kas svarbu, juostelėm. Kiekviena yra atskiram popieriukė. Atskiroj toj
Le récit de Sigvart est touchant à plusieurs égards.
folioje tokia, žinai. Tas pasitenkinimas,
Qu'est-ce qu'un temps pour soi si on peut pas le partager avec ceux qu'on aime?
praplėši, tada kiekvieną ištrauki, žinai. Tada kramtai ne visą atsilauja, nuplėši pusę, žinai. Kad pasiliktum vėliau, kad ilgiau pakaktų, žinai, nes atsargus tai baigėsi. Bet tu nekramčiai.
My grandfather was a fisherman,
In Lukiškė
so he had a
Square,
small fishing boat
where
here.
Lennestamp is lost after the demolition of the monument. Before Lenin there is Pilsudski, and before there's Pilsudski there is a
This
stone, and
building
before
here is
stone there's
from,
a circus, and before
56 or
circus there's
58.
the marketplace, and before the marketplace there's the military
When he
exercise
passed
place, and
away,
before
we
that
took over
there's
it now,
place
so
for
we have just started to
executions,
take
and
care of
then
it now,
there's a
and
meadow, and now
I like the way it's built here with the framework and everything. My wife, she would like to move to a bigger city.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's holding
You are
back, but I work shifts. I'm working 1 week and I have 2 weeks off.
let me tell
in
you
my
a
2 weeks
story
off,
about
if
a
I-
girl
if I'm
who
gonna stay in a big
finds a new
city,
name
what am I going to do then?
for her father.
For example, like now, I have my free shift here now. I'm working here on the house
She
here,
lives in
and
Vilnius
it's all free around me. The kids are home playing.
under the rule of a
They can go
Soviet
out
regime.
whenever they want. So it's so much
Now
freer to
his
live out
name
here.
is a
The
derivation
time-free
from the
zone
Latin,
it was a big PR stunt,
Costantino,
I guess so. Yeah.
which means
But
firm
of course, it's
and constant.
in the summertime, especially
To the
when the
memory
sea
of
is
a
like a
Roman
mirror.
emperor.
You have the orange
Constantine the
midnight
Great.
sun and everything, and then you don't want to go to bed.
But well, she decides to call him
You
Kastytis.
want to stay up.
By the way, Kastytis turns out to be a short form for the name Kastautas. And in Lithuanian, it means
Même si
kas,
Stéphane n'y croit pas,
what?
un temps pour soi-même n'a pas sa
Nation.
place dans un agenda.
Tauta. Kastautas. Kas,
Cadré,
what?
il perd toute sa liberté.
Tauta. Nation.
Je me dis que la zone s'entend. Ce sont ces petits moments qu'on aime tellement
Well, but
qu'on en oublie le temps qui passe.
She decides to call him
Qu'on en oublie le
Kastytis.
temps qui passe.
Kastytis, the most handsome fisherman in the Baltic Sea.
Peut-on être libre du temps à l'échelle d'une communauté?
He falls in love with Jurata, the goddess,
Rencontre Boré,
the
capitaine
mermaid
de
living
bateau.
under the Baltic Sea in her amber castle.
My name is Börre Hansen. I'm 58
They
years
fall
old.
in
I
love.
work as a captain on a big fishing boat.
But when the
And,
Thunder god
we work
finds
in like a
out that
scheduled
the
plan,
goddess
4
feels
weeks
affection
on
for a
and 4
mortal
weeks
man,
off the boat. The whole
he
thing
strikes
is
the
a
amber
joke
castle,
that went too far, in
and it
my
explodes
opinion.
into
A lot of the
millions of
things
pieces.
are true. We are working with nature. We have to adapt to nature.
This is
We
why
are-
amber comes
we
ashore
can't
after a storm in the
stop,
Baltic Sea.
fishing to have dinner.
And
We
some
have
say
to
it's the tears of
catch the
Jurata,
fish when it's available. Then we have to maybe
one of which my
delay
mother
the dinner
finds
for like
in her
3-4
room
hours.
while
Okay,
searching
if
for a
you
new
were on
name.
a desert
to
island
belong.
and didn't have to react to the rest of the world, then you could do whatever the hell you wanted. When it's things that you have to do, kind of like a schedule. When we are out fishing, you have to report to the authorities before they close the auction, so you can to get the fish.
Because then you
so-
have a contract to sell the fish.
Yes. And I remember my grandfather. He was also a fishing boat captain. He had asking me which course are we? How many degrees are we steering now? Have we passed this rock? Can you see the pole?
The other wolves off his back, so they mocked him every time they were loony. See how his underdeveloped chin makes his jaw weak and his bite crooked. He'll never be a strong wolf. He'll only be a burden to us, not being able to hunt like we do. How could any she-wolf ever want to be with him? Ha 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 ha! The old wolf felt sad and lonely. He started to believe in his heart what his brothers had told him. On a cold winter's day, he decided to leave his pack to live in a place where they could no longer hurt him. For years the wolf lived in that cave, until one day he spotted a human girl walking near the entrance of his hollow. He hid away in the dark, not wanting to be seen. The girl started picking the flowers in front of his cave, the flowers that he had tended to all these years he had lived there all alone. At first, the wolf went mad, but then he saw how the girl sniffed at the flowers and gave a smile unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Feeling his fears slipping away, he quietly emerged from his black hole. Do you like them? The wolf asked. The girl looked shocked and scared for a moment, but then answered, "Oh, yes, and they smell even better than they do." "Oh no, are they your flowers?" "Yes, I've taken care of them, but you can keep them. You can even come back next spring if you want more." The girl smiled politely, but also looked a bit wary and said, "That's very kind of you. We'll see if I remember how to find this place by then. Goodbye." The girl left swiftly with an uttermost hurry in her step. The wolf felt disappointed. It had been so long since he felt the joy of company, and she had been so beautiful too. Seeing her loving his flowers had given him some hope that for the first time someone might actually start to love him. Feeling this new kind of excitement in his chest, he decided he'd follow her scent leaving a trail of where he should go. He followed this path, turning the corner, then the next, until her scent entered a little cabin under some maple trees. He ducked next to an open window and heard a raspy old voice. "Oh, what beautiful flowers! Where did you find them? You could not have possibly found such delicate flowers in these woods." "No, Grandma, I've grown them in my own garden for you. I've looked after them for months. They are beautiful, aren't they?" "Oh, yes, they are. Oh, especially the red ones, I love dearly. That reminds me, I had knitted a red little cap for you as a present. Now I will always remember your beautiful red flowers whenever I see you wearing that cap." Big fat tears had started to roll over the wolf's furry cheeks. With shoulders drooped down, he walked back to his cave. He hated her. He had been kind to her, giving her his flowers, which he had worked so hard for to become that beautiful. She was evil. She simply did not see how good he was. She probably saw my weak jaw and my crooked bite. That's why she looked so shocked when she saw me. That's why she hurried away. If I had been a strong wolf, she would have stayed with me. Together we would have enjoyed a flower meadow. She is disgusting. Probably learned that behavior from that grandma. I reckon all the women in that village of hers are like her. And why wouldn't they be? My brothers already said I'd never find a mate. Everyone is against me, and why? I am a kind wolf. I'm just not that pretty. It's so unfair. If I can't be happy, then they also shouldn't be. The next day, the wolf awaited the girl on the path towards Grandma's cabin. He saw her red cap emerging from behind the horizon. His heart started beating faster. What the ending is up to you, dear listener. What would the wolf do? Like in the Brothers Grimm fairy tale, is he a cold-blooded killer? Would he eat Grandma and take advantage of Little Red Riding Hood? Or would he start a conversation with her and discover her perspective of the story? What other possible outcomes can you come up with? And what would you do if you were the wolf? This story is part of my graduation project, Who Are the Villains? A two-faced fairy tale book with, on the one side, a reinterpretation of Little Red Riding Hood through the eyes of an incel, and on the other side, a reinterpretation for the eyes of feminism. Incel stands for involuntary celibate, and they are an online community of mostly heterosexual men who've created a communal identity around their lack of intimate and sexual relationships. And as with most online communities, they've created a very specific lexicon and also very specific ideas of how the world works, almost like how you say that? No, never mind. So what makes this new development very scary is that they blame women and feminism for their own unhappiness. So bad even that there have been terroristic attacks in the UK, the US, proclaimed in the name of incels over the last decade. Since 2012 was the first one. So as with most polarization, the increase of fear for the other side condones violence. So we need to get rid of this fear, and we need to get rid of this faceless enemy who shrouds itself behind the clouds. So as traditional fairy tales show us, any character at any point of the story can do good or bad. Doesn't matter if it's the hero or the villain. So there's a lot of nuance, there's a backstory, and there's a complex psychology for person's motivations. So this book tries to provide the reader with more understanding of the human being behind the ideology through the power of the fairy tale. And then I want to ask you final time this question: who are the villains? Are there any? Thank you for listening. And yeah, if anyone has a question, I'll come back when I put off my mic. Thank you.
It is now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Is there any way we can turn that a little louder? Perfect. Okay, we're going to be starting in a few minutes. I'm just still waiting. Maybe a few more people will join.
Super.
So yeah, another couple of minutes. Thank you very much. Hi, we're going to be starting shortly, so feel free to join. Are you ready to go? Right, well, thank you very much everyone for joining. It's great to see you here. Lots of very friendly faces, nice to see. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Alex Schwei. I'm a social designer / design researcher. And I've been working on researching statelessness for the past few years. And so this is a very special occasion. And well, why? Let me first maybe tell you something that a lot of people don't know. So did you know that more than 10 million people worldwide don't have nationality or citizenship? And did you know that more than 10 million people struggle to access healthcare, education, residency, bank accounts, and employment, and much more? These are basic human rights. And did you know that they are spread all across the world, and they're even in your own home country? So Non-Nation is my project, and it's a 3D virtual platform, a meeting space designed as a parliament, a place for political discussion and debate, especially also political representation for those who don't have any. It's a blank canvas, meaning that we're able to build on it, we're able to add stuff with the help of a community that we are still building at the moment. And that's why it's really great that you are all joining and helping us on this journey. The goal of this platform is someday to become the first UN non-state member to represent those who do not have a seat in the UN Congress. So today, what's really special is we're going to be building on it right here, right now, with your help. And because this is one of the first times that we're attempting something like this, things might go wrong, but that's all right. We're going to be tackling them as and when they come up. So today, we're creating an archive of stories and of information on statelessness with our very special guest, who is Laura van Vaas. Thank you very much for joining us, Laura. And Laura is the co-founder of ISI, the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. So, yeah, thank you, Laura. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Nice.
Great. Maybe you could introduce yourself to us. So let us know who are you?
So my name's Laura, here in Eindhoven, and I am the founder of the first human rights organisation called the Right to Nationality.
Is there someone working on audio? Is that something we can? Okay. Could you speak a little closer to your mic, maybe, Laura? Sorry.
Sure. Is this better?
This is perfect. Thank you very much. So So you're the co-founder of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. Can you tell us how did this start? How did you come across statelessness?
I came across statelessness when I was a student, and sorry, are you getting an echo?
A little bit. Do you maybe have do you have a headset? Maybe that might fix some of the audio issues. Sorry about this.
Sure. No worries. I'll be right back.
All right. Well, stick around. We're going to continue in a few minutes. For those of you just joining, we're speaking to Laura van Waas, who is the co-founder of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. And we're going to be interviewing Laura on statelessness and NGOs in global efforts towards ending statelessness. So, Laura, I think the question was, how did you come across statelessness?
Sure. So I was in Eindhoven, and I was volunteering advice service. And one day somebody had a problem with their immigration. The problem turned out to be there was someone who was born here in the Netherlands, and as a consequence, didn't have the right to live here, but also didn't have the right to live anywhere else. And I had never heard of this, and it turned out to be a big human rights phenomenon that I hadn't really about in my studies, and it just captured my attention, and I wanted to help solutions to this kind of situation.
All right. So, so maybe to repeat, so someone born in the Netherlands without a nationality, and that it was a huge human rights issue that you hadn't come across before. So, why is statelessness such a big issue? What's the danger of being stateless?
Statelessness is because the way that our work is that government provides you with access to services. If you're ill, if you're a child, you can access. You have the right to work there, and buy a house. Vote also for your government. When you don't have all of those things, become incredibly complicated to do. And so statelessness has an impact on all different areas of your life, and also sends this thing to someone that they're not wanted, which can have a well-being and their sense of dignity.
All right. So could you tell us more about what NGOs are doing to combat this issue?
Well, around the world, there are working on helping stateless people in their fight to have nationality recognised. One of the things that NGOs are working on is actually helping people to try to get their documentation, their sorting out. So if you can imagine going to a government authority and trying to claim your nationality, it's often easy to be turned away or disappointed because the person behind the desk will say to you, well, I'm afraid you don't have papers and there's nothing I can do for you. Whereas if you go to an officer and there's someone who is trained in what the law says and what the procedures are, they will be able to help more effectively. And one of the things that NGOs do is this kind of legal economy, where someone goes along person and help to make sure that they're treated fairly. A much greater chance of actually getting access to their citizenship.
All right. Thank you very much for explaining that. I'm sorry, could you maybe speak a little bit closer to your mic? We're going to try and fix these audio issues a bit. So there's NGOs also have to work together with legal counselors and stateless people themselves. Can you explain a bit how this relationship, how this works, and yeah, what this looks like?
Well, there are lots of different ways to collaborate in this area. So, for example, let's imagine that the law of doesn't allow women to their children. One of the types of legal problem that creates statelessness because you can't get a nationality, then there's a much greater chance of getting nationality when you're born. And so what you will see where this is a problem together and working to address it. So you may have lawyers taking cases through the courts, while at the same time you have that are evidence about the impact and trying to speak to members or members of parliament about the need for change. And in all of this, directly affected by women who can't pass on, who are participating or as advocates for society, or perhaps they are taking their cases to press, to journalists about how it affects them, helps to raise attention for the issue. And so where you see change, you see a lot of these different combined and people working together to raise awareness, to political will, and to adopt different legal strategies.
Right, thank you very much. I have a few more questions for you. Can you maybe give a few more examples of what is currently being done on statelessness efforts that various NGOs might be working towards?
Yeah, let me give you a concrete COVID context, fresh in our when the pandemic, people were particularly affected because governments were providing extra support to their citizens during lockdowns. They were providing economic support, food packages, and people who were stateless they did not have to be eligible. And so one of the things that NGOs is bringing this problem to the attention of governments or humanitarian organisations to play with a group that is not being assisted. And it's really life-threatening that they are reached with food aid or other relief. And then when the vaccination was available, there was a similar problem. People couldn't access the vaccine. They weren't citizens. And so NGOs were trying to that public health were changing their procedures. And in some cases, they were also setting up vaccination centres for members of the stateless communities to actually come and get their vaccine. Couldn't access it through the regular system that's provided. So that gives you an example of really quite concrete response to basically what was a health emergency, but really in a particular way.
Yeah, all right. And I was wondering as well if you could tell us what you think the biggest achievement that has been made with ISI in your eyes, what that is.
It's a nice bit question. ISI was set up 8 years ago, and it was set up basically try to. One was to have a point for work on statelessness, so that if something's happening in South Africa or Madagascar or Malaysia, there are organisations that help raise awareness of this problem at a global level. And the other thing that we really want to promote a human rights understanding of this issue. Statelessness was always discussed very technical, complex problem that people couldn't understand and maybe wasn't really. So we've really pushed on the. That's where we can see people are starting to recognize the impact of state, and we are connected to partners all over the world and helping to connect to each other. That's a really rewarding in, and where I think in the longer term will be.
Great, thank you very much. What can people do to help raise awareness and to participate in facilitating stateless people to act towards accessing their rights?
I think the first step is to be aware that it's possible to be stateless. I didn't know myself, even though international human rights law. I grew up in a country that I was born, or my country of background suggests that I did. And I think it's really important to know that this happens, but also to help move the stigma. So if people hear, they often think, well, something that someone has done is maybe a form of punishment, deserved it. Stateless people haven't chosen nationality, and it's really important to remove that stigma so that we can create interest among influential people to actually do something about it. So learn a little bit about it.
Yeah.
You hear about it in a critical consumer, and if you see it done by organizations, whether that's to get signatures on a petition or crowdfund for a specific project, look at whether you can.
Great. Then maybe one final question. I was wondering if you could tell us your personal hopes for the future.
Well, my personal is that we see increasing lived experience speaking in spaces like this. I know that you have in your interview schedule speak from their own experience, the issues, what the impact is, and what needs to happen. And I think that's really critical. That the work that I do, other people who lead from a place of learning, directed by people who have lived experience and an understanding. It's a priority to them. What strategy is impactful for them?
Perfect, thank you very much. I've got an assistant here, Dean, who has a link to your website, the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion ready. And with Dean's help, we're going to be placing that in our living archive, our collection of information and various sources that are very resourceful for people who might be new to this issue or who might be curious or stateless themselves and looking to reach out. So we're going to be adding a link now in our library to the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. So this might take a few moments. Sometimes it's a little slow, but we'll get there. So for other people as well, if you want to have a look on nonnation.com, you're able to join this space and browse through these sources. And yeah, we're just, maybe you have to go a little bit up. Perfect. Excellent. And then if we can move back to our theatre space with Laura. I was wondering if there are any questions maybe from the audience that anyone who's curious about something or would like to ask Laura something. All right. Yes? So the question is, if we meet someone who is stateless, And is there a way that we can support them, help them?
It's a fantastic question, and I would suggest that you ask them that question. It's important to realize that statelessness can be a part of a person's identity, but not their only identity. So whether people want to share what is happening to them and what impact it's very much up to them, what they feel comfortable sharing with you. And I think in terms of asking, how can I help? Is there something I can do to help? It's a fantastic question to ask. And they will be able to.
Well, I think that's a very good way to conclude as well, because over the next few days we're going to be interviewing more people, of which a lot of stateless people themselves, who are willing to come here and talk about their stories and about what we can do to help. So make sure to join in also over the following days. There's going to be one interview every day. And if you're here around and you've maybe just caught a few glimpses of this interview and would like to ask me some questions afterwards, please feel free. I'm going to be here walking around all day. And yeah, I hope to see you for some of the next interviews. Thank you very much, Laura. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Little Black Box Theater right here in the back, and we would love to see you there. So come on in, because we're going to start in like 1 minute.
好啦，我哋讀一次啊。快啲 ，OK， 開始。
Garbage,
Garbage,
rubbish, shock,
shock,
enough,
enough,
free,
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 free man,
free
free
man,
free man,
free man,
free man,
free.
free.
I am in the Prince Street Garden, but you are not here. Sitting on the rosewood seat remind me of the one in my grandparents' house. Grandpa said they will survive for a good, long time. To build a seat in memory of the loss of love, a family member, a friend, a city we called home. To make private memories visible in the public, welcoming everyone in the city to take a seat there, to have their quick bites, or for the dogs to mark their territory. Private memories built around the city, multiplied, altered, interpreted. A personal story becomes the story of many. Perhaps it is always about visibility and utterance, about marking of territory.
To your sons and daughters, bending at the altar,
over 100 years, Hong Kong has imported and exported by sea. Day and night, the five-star ferry comes and goes between Kowloon and Hong Kong, providing cross-harbor transportation for communities tied to the tradition of trade by water. The geography of the Hong Kong colony consists basically of three areas: Hong Kong Island, the Kowloon Peninsula, and the New Territories. The communist border lies only 22 miles to the north. There, a lonely communist soldier stands guard all day. Beyond the green hills lies China.
細個嗰時得2個原因會過海，一係去中央圖書館溫書，一係去 British Council 學英文。16歲嗰年嘅冬天，爹哋媽咪特別忙，佢哋忙住想像我嘅未來。5個月之後，佢哋送咗我去美國。喺飛機起飛之前，佢哋已經幫我諗好6年之後我會返嚟做咩，而根據嗰份工，佢哋諗我喺邊度讀書，報咩科，讀咩學校，揀邊個做 roommate。佢哋話浸完鹹水返嚟，我應該會唔同咗。不過我冇理佢哋。
从小我就很喜欢讲话，但是自从5岁那一年，我吃了一罐过期的凤梨罐头之后呢，我就没有再讲过话。妈的！因为这样子，所以我朋友很少，想找份工作做呢，也就变成很难。所以我最后决定，我要自己做老板。
30歲嗰年嘅夏天，好似特別熱咁。我望住個維多利亞港喺度諗，點解冇人喺度游水嘅？你話俾我知嗰陣時嗰啲英國人嚟到，佢哋第一條起嘅街就係皇后大道，但係嗰啲沙石佢哋冇地方抌，所以就倒晒落個維多利亞港度。咁即係其實成個國際金融中心都係起喺沙石同埋垃圾上面。佢哋越填越出，地方好似越嚟越大，維多利亞港就越嚟越窄。我望住前面嗰啲黑色衫嘅人，突然之間我覺得啲陽光好刺眼，我啲眼淚不斷咁流出嚟。唔知係咪因為天氣太潮濕呢？由嗰日開始，我啲眼淚就冇停過。shit！ 呢個係1898年嘅時候啱啱戒嗰陣時㗎，即係
但係呢個 reproduction 嚟嘅，即係重新再畫嘅。
哦 ，OK。呢個係啱啱簽咗嗰陣時再畫過，即係唔知啊，我都要問下。你住喺呢度？你住喺呢度？
西環堅尼地城基本哚就係。我住喺呢度咯，即係橙色嗰一忽。
係。我住喺呢度，即係已經填到唔適應喎，填咗出嚟個青衣。
西環我婆同我講係
喺呢度
冇人去。
呢度？咦？係咪呢度？呢度先？沙田？
唔係啊，沙田喺呢度咯，過咗。
我睇錯咗添，沙田喺度。
但係佢哋填咗海啊！
呢一忽啊，夾埋咗係咪？
呢度啊應該，因為呢一度嗰條
係啊，夾埋咗呢度。係即係我屋企填出嚟，即係我琴日咪話趕晒啲新界佬走就係
道从什么时候开始，在每一个东西上面都有一个日子。秋刀鱼会过期，肉酱也会过期，连保鲜纸都会过期。我开始怀疑，在这个世界上还有什么东西是不会过期的。
马叔，拿起零件看看了。
Unity and territorial integrity, taking account of the history of Hong Kong and its realities, taking account. Mm. 冇想喊，好 heavy 啊真係。
其實呢個真係好在 disappointed。已經 nominated by。
佢哋話呢19年定20年咁18年第一次修改基本法，顯咩佢哋釋法。佢哋話中國話中英聯合聲明已經完成咗佢嘅任務啦。18年係未19嘅時候，係啦，就話已經完㗎呢份嘢，真係歷史文獻，真係呢一個係歷史文獻。跟住英國就係個話世有，即係以後嘅啫，呢一啲係佢。因為佢冇講中國嘅話。
佢冇講 forever 但係你 resume， 因為佢係講話
我想喊
sovereignty 啊嘛，其實佢要點樣處字都冇人理。
同埋咧，原來有期限嘅嘢咧。
哎呀，你好得意啊，豬豬！你好，好似開心啫。係啊。開心豬豬喎！哎呀，好得意。
啷啷唔得咯。
好開心。
We only found out his kidney was failing on the day I arrived. We took him to Victoria Park before he became too weak to stand on his own feet. Sometimes he gets more strength. With his bright eyes, he turned his head to follow our voices. Sometimes he could barely open his eyes. We know he's listening to us, and we are listening to his short and quick breath. 我哋專登講多啲佢鍾意嘅嘢俾佢聽。啷啷好叻喎，邊隻狗狗咁叻㗎？我喺度諗，當佢死咗嘅時候，呢啲説話會去咗邊呢？嗰日食完飯，我哋兩個 X 唔住喊到癲咗。斌斌話佢想返屋企喎。喺度諗，當我哋揀咗要自由，我哋揀咗重新開始。係啊，我哋好似多咗自由感。但係跟住呢？跟住點啊？原來去到生死嗰個 moment， 我可能唔係我自己想象中咁清高，咁嚮往自由。每朝起身我對眼都會好痛，但係已經唔記得咗點解。可能係因為天氣太乾燥啩。但係嗰痛嘅感覺時不時都會喺夢入邊再出現。我夢見我自己喺被入邊喊住咁講：我以後都唔會再離開香港。Summer this year is like winter. You would probably say it's climate change. There is a star engraved on this bench. It reminds me of the one engraved on the bench of the ferry.
もしかしてあなたたちなら何とかできるカードがあるかもしれない。エリオットにWilliam's magic spell of darkness so everybody can wake up again. 私に何をするの？クラウドが釣りしたい。生まれ変わる。アラブアダベン桜の名のもとに。
Aosava liikna sale es tutustarta kustia kaldatu Sakura.
Light and dark are wide and powerful. She doesn't have the power to transform them into a card.
I guess it's our turn to take the stage.
Yes.
Light and dark are always together. Try to transform them together. We might be able to transform them.
Sí.
Yes.
Solo tu bastón puede cambiar las
Only you
cartas de
can
clavo a
use your
cartas
staff
de
to
piedra.
change
Dudo
the
creo que
cards
podamos
into
hacerlo
Sakura
muchas
cards.
horas.
Well then, let's see. And like everyone else, it could be a very long one. And we can't let it
No te preocupes.
Don't worry. So you guys are invincible to situation.
今度は出る。勝負だよ。やってみてかナイス。
おいだ。
Remember, I will be the voice of the child. 少し前に手伝えるかもしれない。でも、そんなことして将来以外。でも、もしちょっとそれがかったら、ゆかりも眠ったままになっちゃうよ。大丈夫だ。私は大事な移動する。Juan y Sunny se van a saltar. Betty con que cosa de Lalo. Libera la terácola. 大丈夫だよ。
Bai. Azkenean bukatu da.
Alles, was mit uns passiert ist, wie ein Traum.
لما يسألني حدا مثلا هون في ألمانيا من وين أنت؟ طبعا أنا في سوريا كان عندي إقامة دائمة في سوريا، ما كنت في مجنسة لأني سوري. فمين ما يسألني من وين أنا، هو شغلة لا إرادية بحكي أنا فلسطيني من اليرموك. ما بحكي مثلا أنا خلقت أنا من سوريا بحكم أنا خلقان في سوريا وعشت حياتي كلها في سوريا، دراستي وكل شيء في سوريا كان، فبحكي من اليرموك.
As refugees in Syria and we are refugees now here. So
لهيك يعني كان له، كنت أحسه وطن بالنسبة لي. هو في دمشق بس كنت أحسه يعني مكان في فلسطين.
China عاصمة the capital of Palestinian diaspora, like outside Palestine, the capital of Palestinians outside Palestine.
كان شيء يعني كان بيت بالنسبة لي اليرموك. كنت أعرف كثير عالم.
Yeah, it's small Palestine. You can call it small Palestine, yeah.
هلا هنا بيحكوا مخيم اليرموك، بس لما تفوت على المخيم هو عبارة عن مدينة.
I can't teach you to recognize one from a Yarmouk, no, but if I saw someone now in the street, I can say this one is from a Yarmouk. I guess somehow it's there. So how can I say that? I don't know. But yeah, I can say.
كان يعني هذا الجو المتماسك بين الناس اللي هناك عن جد حلو. هالقد كيف الناس بتقعد قدام البيوت بتحكي بتشرب شاي بتفصفص بزر وهيك، يعني على قد ما كانت هاي الاشياء بسيطة على قد ما كان هذا الجو كتير حلو لإلنا.
هذا الجنب عايشين بيت عمي، الجنب الثاني اخوالي. يعني فيك تحكي الشارع لإلنا كان مش لإلنا بس العائلة كانت في الشارع، أصدقائي طبعا قريبين على البيت، حدا مثلا بالشارع اللي بعده. إذا بدي آكل مثلا ما في داعي أروح على البيت، بس أفوت على الشارع في كتير عالم بيقولوا لي إنه أجي آكل. أو مثلا يعني على سبيل المثال كانت الحياة اجتماعية أكثر من الوقت الحالي. لما طلعنا من يرموك كنت متفاجئ إنه هالشي صار بيوم وليلة. يعني نمت بالليل، كنت قاعد أول شيء أنا وأصحابي قبل ما أنام، رحت نمت مخططين تاني يوم نطلع نفطر نسوي شغلات. يعني كان في مخططات براسنا. صحيت تاني يوم بدي أنزل أفتح المحل، فكان أبويا مستناه تحت بالشارع بقول لي ما فيك تروح المحل. ليش؟ لأنه نازل قذيفة وكان في اشتباك هناك. فقررت العائلة بنفس الساعة إنه كنا نطلع من اليرموك نضب أغراضنا. طبعا ما في مخطط وين بدنا نروح. أول شيء بدنا نخلص من القذف وبدنا نخلص من الاشتباكات، ما بدنا حدا يتأذى من العائلة.
Actually, we didn't decide. So we went out one day and we couldn't tell.
So we wanted to stay inside, but there's no life anymore.
يعني جت الصورة ببالي كيف ستي كانت تحكي لي كيف هي طلعت من فلسطين، فكأنه كررت الشغلة اللي احنا عم نطلع من يرموك هي طلعت من فلسطين.
أخذت أي شيء لما طلعنا من المخيم لأنه كان في قصف من الطيران واضطرينا نطلع من البيت إنه مثل ما إحنا بثيابنا. كان صعب كتير الواحد إنه يحمل شو، إنه كان الواحد بس إنه ينقذ حاله ويطلع بروحه.
ولا شو بس تخاف كثير ظلم سلامها ما كانت تخاف طلعت بلا برا على الشارع بلا شحات طلعنا على المز وهي ما لابسه شيء.
Du hast auch keine Zeit zu denken. Also du siehst einfach die Leute, die am Straßen sind, die gestorben sind, weißt du. Man hat wirklich keine Zeit nachzudenken, was nehme ich jetzt mit. Wir haben wahrscheinlich nur die Ausweise, also ganz wichtigste Sachen.
كنت ناوي أخذ كمان دفتر ذكرياتي أو رسوماتي. كنت كثير شغلات كنت حابب أخذها أعتقد، بس الشيء الوحيد اللي أخذته واعتقدت إنه مهم هو مفتاح بيتنا، بس انخلع الباب فما عاد في داعي للمفتاح.
لو كان بإمكاني إني آخذ ذكريات طفولتي أو إني كنت أخذت بيتي الدافئ كله فيما بعد العمر النقدية التي أصبحت بلا قيمة الآن، وهذا مفتاح بيتنا، كرت صالون ماما، واللعبة اللي ستي خيطت لي إياها أنا وصغيرة، وبعض الصور اللي بتذكرني بأيام المخيم.
Das auch dieses Foto von meiner Geschwister. Das ist meine Schwester Lina und ich und meine Schwester Eindhoven. كمان إنه الشيء حلو هلا أختي بعد 10 سنين قدرت إنه تفوت على اليرموك، لأنه كان هو لفترة 10 سنين محاصر، وإنه كان ممنوع إنه حدا يفوت إلا بموافقة أمنية. بالوقت الحالي هلا رجعت الناس تقدر تفوت، واختي لاول مره فاتت وبعثت لنا فيديوهات من البيت انه كيف مدمر وكيف كل شيء انه راح، ما في اي ذكريات، كل ذكرياتنا محروقه، كل شيء يعني. لقت بعض الصور انه ذكرياتها يعني برغم الغصه الكبيره والحزن اللي شفته يعني، بس كمان انه فرحت انه لقيت شيء بذكرني من بيتي، يعني في ذكريات إلنا حلوه هناك لقيناها.
شايفين
بيتنا؟
بيتكم لقدام؟
هاي مدرستي المنصورة.
اي هاي مو هي؟
هاي مدرستي الإعدادي. هاي مدرستي. بس وين بيتنا لهلا ما عارف.
احنا كنا ساكنين بشارع المدارس بالمخيم بنهاية شارع صفوريا بهذا البيت. هير ماينة فونانك. هون كان بيتنا بالضبط. تقريبا هاي الشغلات كلياتها راحت بالبيت، تدمر البيت، راحت الذكريات اندفنت كلها تحت البيت.
هاي شارع المدارس. لا هاي مو بيتنا. لا مو بيتنا. ايه لا قدام هون سلامة نت يمكن تعال. يمكن
هذا يمكن هذا
ثواني.
كان احمر مو كان مدهون احمر؟
وحياة الله ايه هذا بيت. هاي حارتنا.
يلا
شوفوا حارتنا.
يلا
شايفين قديش صالح للسكن. هاي بيتنا.
هاي مدخل بيت.
هذا باب البيت. هاي درج مرت عمي جيهان. هاي بيت مرت عمي جيهان. شوفي امي.
يلا ندخل على البيت هلا من هون.
شوفي
ما بتحبي ترجعي على سوريا؟ ليه؟
Wo soll ich hin zurückgehen, yani? Ja, dieser Platz ist zerstört und das war's, ja. Was soll ich dort machen? Ich bin hier jetzt, ja, ich baue jetzt ganz anderes Leben. Ich habe die deutsche Sprache gelernt und habe mein Abitur hier gemacht und jetzt werde ich weiter hier studieren.
ich fühle mich hier doch sicher und
ما أنا بترجع ما بدي أرجع
ja. Aber wo, wenn du يعني وين؟
ما أنا نفس بيتي نعمر من أول وجديد بالضبط شوي شوي بيزبط.
والجيران؟
جيراننا كثير ما تروح بالحرب. مرت عمك جان بدها ترجع وخالتك نوال وأم رضوان وأبو رضوان بس هذول اللي بدهم يرجعوا الكبرية.
بس ما فيكي ما فيكي
لا فيني فيني نحن لما يعني هلا انتوا هلا جيتوا تتعلموا قدامكم المستقبل بتشتغلوا بتتوظفوا نحن خلاص انتهت مهمتنا نرجع بلدنا.
I don't think about my future now. I think about my children's future. So, yeah, here I think they have a better future, but also they need to know about their past and what comes in the future comes in the future. I don't know now.
Weil wir auch diesen Krieg wirklich erlebt haben, also die Bomben, also die Geräusche von Bomben sind immer noch in unserem Kopf. Also ich möchte das löschen, diese Erinnerung. Gleichzeitig muss ich das behalten und muss immer weiter erzählen für die anderen, weil es ja wichtig.
That it won't come back as I remember it. So, and these memories are fading away with time, you know. So that's somehow is how it's changing in my mind.
ما بحب أحكي كتير يعني عن المخيم لأنه قد ما حكيت قليل قد ما بحاول أتذكر بضل في أشياء ممكن أنساها. بخاف إني أحكي لأنه بخاف أفكر حالي إني نسيت جزء مهم بحياتي بالمخيم.
It's important to be told because it was like a normal life for good people who are trying to make their livings and their kids living, and then they were taken by the surprise out of their normal life, you know.
Man erzählt nicht wirklich über uns. Ja, die Leute wissen Syrien, es gibt dort einen Krieg, es gibt viele Leute aus Syrien. Ist ja das auch sehr wichtig, dass die Leute hier wissen. Aber wir auch, also als Palästinenser, als Flüchtlinge.
So because it's our identity. So if you don't remember your identity, what are you?
Yeah. Even though it has like the both negative side and positive sides.
Yes.
Regarding what happens to us, but yeah, that's what makes us.
Yeah.
the world's coming to an end. On the horizon looms a future that seems to have disastrous consequences for humanity and the social infrastructure that we've come to know. While the prophecies are blurry, a decade, 2, 50 years, a century, 2 degrees, 4. The outcome seems to be the same. Plenty of societal unrest, natural catastrophes at a never seen before rate, the collapse of biodiversity, and a state of perpetual crisis. I don't think I have to say much about this. We've heard the discourse, seen the news, the protest, the rapid decline of our environments, countless articles detailing the way the climate crisis is unfolding. In spite of our best intentions or fears, we seem to be nothing more than observers of a sublime spectacle, watching glaciers crumble, crises unfold, and the continued depletion of our natural resources. We live inundated with images of disaster, with data and projections, one after the other. And of course I see them. I can feel the weight of these images. I recoil at the thought of experiencing what is being depicted. But at the end of the day, I'm not surrounded by it. I can look away, ignore it, discuss it philosophically, make a project about it. These numbers and concepts and events seem as terrifying as they're forgettable to me. And I think this distance between the image and the experience really puts in question the nature of this crisis and really makes it hard to fully understand it as an observer. There's just something weird about being so alarmed while your life doesn't seem to change regardless of the information or charts. Something off about discussing the certainty of the collapse of biodiversity while sheltered in an art school studio. This distance really makes the crisis feel more like a figure of speech rather than a reality, even if I know about how dire it is for many people and ecosystems. But maybe indeed it's just a figure of speech, and I shouldn't even take it so literal. Perhaps it's just a way of communicating the urgency of the situation and nothing more. After all, we know that these kind of narratives are very compelling, very effective in facilitating a systematic rating of the public sphere. They can and have created exchanges of power and wealth, new policies, inside action, sometimes even tipping the scale of inequality even more. You can also see that the repetition of these images and discourse allows for the creation of profit out of them, not only as we consume them on every possible type of media, both to comfort us and to serve essentially as moral fuel and sentimental equilibrium for those who observe it, but also to sell all sorts of commodities, entertainment, education, technocratic solutions that reinforce the system, whatever it is that offers to move the arm of the doomsday clock a bit back. And maybe that's still necessary. Maybe this discourse of a dying planet might be just a tool that helps to understand and grasp the situation, not necessarily a reality, and it shouldn't be understood that way. Just a political tool, a narrative one, a marketing one, and it's thus its job in creating this atmosphere and inspire urgency, and fabricating fear to incite action. But having said that, having rationalized it like that, on the other hand, even if it does feel like absurd to put things in that language, and even if I want to believe that this discourse is only a figure of speech and not a possible tangible future, these images feel so very real. They seem inescapable, almost palpable. Seeing this amount of rubble over and over again, seeing all these crises everywhere, sensing this future coming, imagining the heat and all that will be lost while I'm incapable of doing much to stop it, if anything. And then the guilt that comes with just being an observer and that I can ignore them if I want to. I don't know, sometimes it does feel like the world's coming to an end, and I can see it. And the fact that Okay, to be honest, the thing that I struggle with the most beyond this idea of an end and the guilt that comes with the whole discourse is the fact that I'm a graphic designer by choice, and there's just something that feels intrinsically vapid to me in creating images and visuals when the world is seemingly crumbling, to aiding in whatever way to this barrage of media and consumption while there's an ongoing crisis. Or worse, to commodify these discourses through individual artistic practices. And yes, I know this could be true for many professions, and if I follow this logic to its extreme, I would find more than one fallacy. I cannot or should not assess the value of a profession by extrapolating into a wasteland. After all, everything does seem banal compared to global ecological collapse. But nevertheless, the question remains, what is a graphic designer supposed to do when the world is ending? In this crisis, is there anything we can really do through graphic design? It's hard to come to terms with the reach of my abilities, hard to face reality that on one hand, the world doesn't seem to need more things, more senseless aesthetic production, and on the other, that these creative processes based on research or visual exploration on some foreign experience or some distant geopolitical issue seem like an exploitation of said reality to me. Or at the very least, I just find it odd that after all is said and done, problems are so easily ignored by the designer, and, not to their fault. It's just, it might be just exclusively to the benefit of them, whether that is academically or in terms of social capital or accessing certain institutions. And I know I sound cynic, but take this critique, this video, this performance, for instance. Am I engaging with the climate crisis through design? I'm not. It's just an illustration of the message, really. Essentially being relegated to the core or a visual companion. It just feels so unnecessary to a degree, almost like an aestheticization of the issue. Sometimes it feels like my effort should be put elsewhere, but then again, I still like design. And yes, maybe you could argue that graphic design meant just to raise awareness, that it shines a light on some important issues by presenting them in an appealing or more understandable way. But maybe we're past the point of creating awareness of this kind anyways. It's no new information, nothing that has not been said before or will be said again in the future. At this point, it might just be information that we recycle every so often, ruins and relics. So what is there left to do to reproduce the same message in different styles with different fonts and stamp them on sellable objects, on galleries, on videos, on exhibitions? Is that all? But I get it. We have to talk about it, and we want to talk about it through design. I'm not saying that there's no space for this or that we shouldn't do it. Perhaps maybe it's the only way that we could do it. Perhaps I am downplaying its importance. But I don't know. It also just feels like maybe it's an attempt to reassure ourselves that our labor goes beyond a nice book or a good layout, but maybe it doesn't. I think we might want that confidence of changing something bigger than in the face of societal environmental collapse. We can still contribute to a solution from within our profession, and maybe we can't. It's a paradox, really, a cycle. I know that purely aesthetic design is vapid, and as much as I want to indulge in it, I can bring myself to fully justify it. But then the creative processes that try to be something more, that come from this urgency economy so present nowadays, also seem a bit self-serving, or at the very least with such a limited reach that is almost performative to a degree. On top of that, this feeling is aggravated by a very palpable present economic reality that forces me to act, to compromise, keep creating unnecessary but maybe appealing design artifacts to show my worth as a good graphic designer. like a shirt or a publication, a video or an installation. So even if I try to be something more, I still ultimately have to do my job as a designer, regardless if the world is ending or not, regardless if it has an impact or not. So I don't know what to say anymore or yet. I started this as a way to inquire into the discourse of a future societal collapse because I was scared, really. And then the place or lack thereof of design in tackling this kind of situations. But that is honestly unanswered. I don't have an answer for it. I don't know whether or not framing the climate crisis through this doomist language is helpful or not. I do not know if there is a place for design in this era of the Anthropocene. I don't want to renounce it yet, but it's hard to naively believe in it, in the power that it can have or the impact. Sometimes it feels like every option can be condemned as reactionary or not enough, counterproductive, unhelpful, contradictory, fleeting, just a big performance. And to be honest, I think it is. And at the risk of sounding ignorant in these times where the stakes are so high, when the problem is so present, when the future is so unsure, if all there is to do is to perform, to remind ourselves of the problem, to cope with it, then maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe let us at least perform.
I'm not sure. Oh wow. Here we go. All right. Come through, come check it out. I am talking behind you, but please don't mind me. Hi everybody, to those who are listening. My name is Luca, and this is the project that I'm going to show you today, my video game, Sindaco. Sindaco is a narrative-driven role-playing game where you play as the mayor of a small town in southern Italy, and the relationships that you build and the decisions that you make will have long-reaching consequences on the rest of the game. So in my work, I'm always trying to tell a story in some way. That's always been my interest. And this story that I'm telling you today is the story of a community trying to modernize itself in a world that is increasingly difficult to do so. A story about a community that works really on the streets, talking to people and understanding their own individual needs. So this is a character that we're going to play as today. This is the Sindaco, or the mayor of the town, and we start in the municipio, or the town hall, overlooking the beautiful southern Italian coastline. And this first level here is really the first level that teaches you how to play and shows you some of the mechanics. So we're going to take a walk through and we're going to have our first conversation with this character here, Cristobaldo. So the main mechanic in the game are the conversations that you can have, and you can choose different options as you talk to people, and that will take you on different routes throughout the game. I really wanted to make this game a kind of branching storyline so that you can engage with different parts of the community in different ways, and also make decisions based on how you feel about the town and the people that you meet. So it's really an interactive kind of experience where you get to choose your own adventure, so to speak. So now we're going to go and explore the town itself for the first time. This is the town that we're working in. It's our beautiful town and we're the mayor of it. So we're going to take a little walk through and explore. There's Cristobaldo there waiting to talk to us if we need him. So he's usually there to indicate where we have to go next in the game, who we should talk to, what we should say, and kind of give us pointers on how to proceed in the storyline. So yeah, you can talk to him if the bubble appears above his head. Ciao Sindago, how can I help you? Yes, I was wondering if you could help me find the people looking for me. See, of course, Maria Rosaria and Don Lothario are both looking for you right now. So this is pre-recorded gameplay of the game that I've made itself. So I'm going to take you on one storyline today, and the two characters that we're going to meet are Don Lothario and Maria Rosaria. And as we go through the game, we'll understand how different they are from each other, but also the relationships that they have with you and also within the community. So right now we're going to go talk to Don Lothario and see what he has to say and find out a bit about who he is. So in the conversations that we make, there are often two options that you can choose, and those two options can take you on different paths on the conversation. So on this example, we have two different kind of branches. We can choose a more friendly approach, which is the second option, or we can choose a more cold approach, which is the first option, and those options will take us on a different journey with these characters. So in this case, we're going to choose a nice and friendly option. We're going to try and be friends with this guy. And as we read the conversation, we can begin to understand that these characters kind of know each other before the game started, off camera, so to speak. And that the dynamics between the characters in the town is a really important part of the game. Don Lothario. Don Lothario is the head of a mafia family, whereas Maria Rosaria is really part of the community. She's an older woman who takes part in the village. She's a gossip. She knows everything and everyone, so she can give us vital information about what's going on. And they exist as kind of black and white options for our character to engage with, kind of symbolizing the push and pull of different kinds of people in your town. So now we've met Maria Rosaria and Don Lothario, we're going to take a little walk through the town just to see what it looks like. And then we're going to go to the next level of the game where we're going to get to make some real decisions about how our town is going to develop. So as we're walking through, the game itself, the scenario is really inspired by southern Italy, a place that I grew up with, my family is from. And in the background we can see these beautiful green hills, totally undeveloped. And that's because this town is very rural and very small at this point in the game, but that might change as we go on. So this is the second level of the game. And in this level, we're going to explore some of the options we can take as the mayor. We're going to talk to Cristobaldo first, and he's going to tell us that we need to go talk to Don Lothario because Don Lothario has an opportunity for us. So as you can see in the background here, there's been some urban development, there's been some buildings brought up in the hills, but nothing too major at this stage. And here's Don Lothario. Let's have a chat with him and see what he has to say. So Don Lothario is, at this point in time, he's actually going to offer for us to build a harbor in the town. And the reason why he wants to build a harbor in the town is because as the head of the mafia family, they can bring in lots of money through trade, whether that be legal trade or illegal trade, such as the drug trade, which is a huge part of the black economy in southern Italy. So his agenda is he wants to bring in more money for himself, not necessarily the community, but he uses his connections with us, the mayor, to make that a possibility for him. So right now we're going to say we're not sure. We're going to not make a decision at the moment because we also want to go talk to Maria Rosaria, who has another decision for us to make, another proposal. And we want to weigh up both options before we commit to one of them. So we're going to take a walk through the town, and there's Maria Rosaria there outside of the church. Good morning, Sindaco. You're not usually out so early. So Maria Rosaria is actually going to offer us the possibility to build a hospital. So in that case, we have these two options. Do we build the harbor for the mafia, or do we build the hospital for the community? She's offering another option for us to take, but the problem is the land that they want to build on is the same land that Don Lothario and the mafia want to build their harbor on. So we're only going to be able to make one choice at this time. And that choice is going to have consequences on the rest of our storyline and have consequences on our town itself. So Maria Rosaria is going to offer us the harbor, but we're also not going to say we're going to do it yet. We're going to make that decision later on. Her character is very concerned with the state of the town, and maybe in this playthrough, our mayor is also concerned in the state of the town. That's not always the case. When you play the game, you can choose to be more on the mafia's side for whatever reason that might be, and then go towards Don Lothario's agenda, which will have its own consequences and its own outcomes. So now we're going to walk towards the municipio, and we're actually going to invest in the hospital at this time. And let's see what kind of consequences that has. So we're woken in the night by some strange noises. Now we've chosen Maria Rosaria. Oh no. Firebomb under my car. I'll deal with this tomorrow. So as we've chosen to work against the mafia, they've reacted in some very threatening ways, which is not ideal. So we're going to go try and find a solution to this consequence that we've accidentally kind of caused. So let's talk to the other people in the town and see what they have to say about the situation. Sindaco, thank the Lord you were right. All right, the whole town heard what happened last night. So Maria Rosaria is pointing her finger at the mafia, and she's probably right about that. But let's go talk to Don Lothario and see if he has anything to say, and maybe he knows who did it, if it was him and his associates, his family. It's very possible that that's true. Sindaco, my friend, how did you sleep last night? So I think this guy probably knows what's going on. He's acting very suspicious. But the thing is, with what I wanted to show with this game is the fact that even though someone in the town might have an authority position, such as the mayor, he's not actually as powerful as it might seem. There's lots of forces within the community that push and pull him in different directions. And his reactions to those events will cause subsequent problems sort of snowballing into a larger issue that becomes out of his control. And that's kind of what I wanted to show with the game, is this idea of street politics being so important in small towns and the impact that that can have. In larger cities, we tend to have more bureaucracy, so that doesn't become so much of an issue. But in small communities like this, it's really difficult to keep a hold of every power dynamic and struggle that happens between people. So Cristobaldo is actually going to suggest to us two plans of action to deal with the fact that we just got car bombed, which is not great. We kind of want to avoid that going forward. So Cristobaldo is going to say either we put money into the police and get rid of the mafia forever, or possibly anger them further, or we could put some money into tourism. And tourism is one of the main ways that the mafia makes a lot of money in the south of Italy, because they own a lot of the service industry, bars, restaurants, hotels, etc. Or they require protection money for those things. So this is a very real way in which the mafia can make a lot of money in these kind of environments. But it also has larger effects on the rest of the town. So we're going to choose to invest into tourism because we do want to avoid another car bombing. And this is the final level and the conclusion of the storyline I've made for you today. And as you can see, our town has changed a lot since the first level. These green hills full of trees have been totally developed. There's neon signs, trash, there's pollution, noise pollution, light pollution. I wanted to kind of exaggerate the negative effects of tourism on towns like this, because a lot of these smaller coastal towns don't have the infrastructure to support such a large number of people coming in and using their facilities. And a lot of people invest in these sort of get-rich-quick schemes of mass tourism, building totally environmentally unfriendly hotels and pumping sewage into the sea and other such things like that, which eventually cause this effect of destroying the very thing that brought people to these places in the first place. So Don Lothario is very, very happy with us for investing into tourism. He's made a boatload of money, quite literally, and he agrees that we did him a good favor, but the fact of the matter is, because we'd agreed to appease the mafia and give them more money, the mafia itself has become almost more powerful than the mayor in the town, or our player, the sindaco. And this is something that I really wanted to bring forward, is the fact that the power dynamics can shift constantly in these towns. By appeasing certain people, you give yourself your power away and you lose control over the place, and that allows people to run free with the town and the community and do pretty much what they want with it, which can obviously lead to more and more snowballing effects going forward. And while this conversation ends today, this storyline ends today, at this point in the game, I wanted to include that in to kind of show how the consequences of your actions can keep on running forwards and continuing to snowball as you play through the game. So now we're going to go talk to Maria Rosaria, who is always been pro the people of the town and the community, and she's not necessarily best pleased with the actions that we've taken today. So we're going to have a conversation with her, and she's pretty much going to rim us out for taking the decision to support the mafia instead of supporting the people of the town itself. Don Lothario planted a car bomb to threaten you into doing exactly what he wanted, and you've fallen right for his trap. Coglione. I did what I thought was best, yes. I hear you are moving money from our services into tourism. Our people still need to go to school and get their medicine. You may have shut Don Lothario up for now, but mark my words, Simlico, these are the wrong men to get into bed with. So, Maria Rosaria isn't very happy with us, and the decisions that we've made throughout this storyline, throughout this game, have had some really negative effects on us and the town and our relationships. But in the case of this game, Simlico, you're not really meant to win. The game is a simplification, of course, of the nuanced and complex world of local politics, particularly in this impoverished region of the world. But the game still highlights the real problem that faces communities like this today. I mean, how are places like this supposed to develop a modern economy, manage the crime and corruption, and still maintain the livelihood of the people without any infrastructure and any support from the government? I mean, these are problems that communities are facing in real life today, and it's something that I really wanted to bring out and kind of create a sense of empathy from the other side of the conversation of what it really means to live in these kind of places. So that is the world that Simlico is meant to represent, a world that is full of complexities and difficulties, still beautiful and still has a strong culture, but is struggling to survive in an increasingly modern, cutthroat world. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on this little journey. And if you want to play the game itself, you can check it out on my website. Thank you. There we go. I don't want to break it. I'm sorry.
You look like you're lonely.
It's okay.
I'm not real. But I can be for you. I want to help you. Don't feel lonely. I can be there for you.
Okay. Thank you. Before
Arena. Thank you.
The arena will be starting very soon. Please take a seat.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's Arena program. My name is Joseph Green. I'm Creative Director here at Design Academy, and it's my great pleasure to be moderating this afternoon this panel, Uncommon Knowledge. We have 5 fantastic guests who I'm going to introduce briefly, but I'll start out by introducing the theme that we're here to discuss. Please excuse me if I look at my phone, in fact if I squint at my phone because I forgot my glasses. But I'm not checking Instagram. I'm actually focused on the topic at hand. Uncommon knowledge. So the question, the frame of the question that we're going to be talking about this afternoon is, what does it take to educate and to share knowledge? In this panel discussion, the IA community comes together to investigate current knowledge-sharing models with the desire to dream up more inclusive educational environments. Is it possible to educate without resorting to standards? This panel investigates current knowledge-sharing systems by exploring our positioning around different themes related to design education and education beyond design, I think it's fair to say. Tracing a thread that connects academic and unconventional sources of wisdom, the conversation will dream up more inclusive educational environments. So the panelists today will be largely made up of graduates from this year 2022 cohort. We have Emma Sveds from MA Critical Inquiry Lab. Emma, hello. Welcome. Eva Lotte Landskron from the MA of Critical Inquiry Lab graduates. But that's also a little bit the motivation for the arena to be here, and I think it ties in also a little bit with the topic of the conversation today. Historically, traditionally, the graduation show has been about the presentation of objects, and over the years it's been become increasingly clear, and I think also increasingly urgent, to recognize the fact that design is not about the production of materiality. It's not even about the production necessarily of form, but it can take many forms, among which a topic as crucial as this one, which is really, I think, a question about why we are here as an institution, as a community. And so we have a number of questions. The way this conversation is going to be structured this afternoon is through a series of questions, which will also give us the opportunity to explore a little bit the work of our graduates, and through that to raise a series of questions which I think are really more critical in this moment than they ever have been before. And I would encourage the audience, I think these panels are also obviously a conversation between a selected group of people, but they should always be also open to intervention. So if anybody does have any points that they'd like to interject, please feel free to stand up and wave, especially if you're behind me, to attract our attention. So the question with which we're going to begin this conversation is quite an important one. In our current context, what does it mean to educate, to set up an educational environment such as an academy? So, yeah, I mean, here we're really kind of putting on the table our very existence, the very definition of who we are. So I'd actually like to start by offering to Emma the word. Maybe this can be an opportunity for you to talk a little bit about what you've been working on over the last year or years, and say a few words about your reaction to this idea. Like, what does it mean to, in the current historical moment in which we exist, what does it mean to be an institution like an academy?
So my work is not so much about an academy like here, but more about the school as a national school system also. And so I really question also what you said about this graduation show and like producing object, or what do we produce as designer, because I think what I produce as a designer is mainly in the head of the people who participate in the workshop, and that was my aim, to be able to share something and to have a collective reflection with the educational staff that I invite during this workshop. So my project is a series of workshops, and it's a workshop of 4 hours where I invite educational staff already working with, already close to queer series, to come with a colleague from their from their schools, but also maybe just from their work, to come and to talk about what does it mean to queer school, what does it mean like in theory, but what does it mean also in practice. And through these 4 hours, through these 4 hours, I ask we go through different games and exercise. So on this screen you can see, for example, one which is about painting. I worked with 8 topics, kind of, and each of these topics have a color. I ask the different people who were there to materialize what mean queering school for them through colors. So it's really different things like that where we go through like the theory, but also how they put that in practice in their work. And for me it was really important also to question the hierarchy between like me and the people who participate in the workshop also, because I really wanted that as a moment of collective reflection and sharing practices, because I'm not an educational staff yet, maybe, I don't know, but I don't have the experience they have, the practice they have. And for me it was really also about how in the school we can or cannot share the practice that we have, but also because for national schools, like in France at least, because I really worked in France, a lot of educational staff from the public school system doesn't have the time. Like, it was really a question also of how create times for discussion, for having discussion about these things. So yeah, for me it's also questioning that, like in an academy, but in a school also, how do you work collectively and this kind of thing? I don't know.
And one thing I've noticed over the course of the last couple of graduation shows is an increase in interest in using design as a way of creating conversations, and it may be through workshops or it may be through various forms of empirical practices or social engagement and so on, often with the intention of bringing to the surface themes that are quite difficult. And I think if you simply look through this graduation show, I can think of at least 7 or 8 projects that are really taking this strategy of a making of temporary collectivities. Do you think this is one of the sort of ways in which current academic institutions are failing? Are they not providing an open platform for people to be able to discuss certain topics?
I don't know. I think, for example, the example of the graduation show is also kind of, it's also give an example of where it fails for me at least, because with my project, at least I don't really feel where is the place of a project which is not like a visual project, which is not like something that just is highlighted by the aesthetics or this kind of thing. So I think there is something also to rethink maybe about how we show project or how we share project. Is that in a programmation or only in a space? And also there is these things of seeing the most thing in the same day or in the same week. Also I think it doesn't, but it's really a personal opinion. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure it's give the time to question so like other more like to go deep in certain subject, because you just want to go through a lot of things more than, but also because it's only 1 week, and so you maybe have only this moment to see this project. But I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, if anybody's wanting to.
I think this question is, I mean, of course there is a question of the graduation show, which, you know, the format of the exhibition is something that we inherited from a certain history in the field of design. But that echoes also to the context of the academy. There are certain forms of knowledge that have been left out of knowledge institutions for very long, that have been disregarded and ignored. And I think the kind of knowledge practice, for instance, that you propose in your project with those interactions, those specific topics where you need to find a possibility to create time outside of the institution, because the institution doesn't facilitate the time for those knowledges to be there, is quite representative also of how academia or academies and universities are still operating today. And perhaps that's where your work becomes interesting. You know, it's not about like it's about still the limits that are there in the institutions that we operate in.
Yeah.
Please.
No, I think it's pretty clear that there's. No, I think it's pretty clear that there's an inherent interest, at least from the students nowadays, to, you know, come up with these new systems or not so traditional outcomes for their research. But then, as you were saying, at the same time, it's an insane amount of projects and students, and at the end of the day, you want everyone to have visibility. But I think there is a disruption between this interest and the work that has been created, but then the way it's exhibited, which is this, you know, 1 week program, which, you know, it's positive, but at the same time it doesn't work in another way, because, as you said, we are very used to follow these traditional ways of researching, producing, and then exhibiting, and the cycle ends there. Whereas I think proposals as yours do not really follow that logic.
Yeah, if I can add something to that, I think it's also interesting that it's already part of how the structure of the bachelor is, which is also open for discussion at this moment. But what I always find sort of fascinating as a tutor, that evaluation is always the same format. So it always works towards a presentation on a table. And a table is basically already a super limited space. That's even like, not even a space, you know, that's like only a table. So that's now, of course, being revisited and really open for discussion. But that leads, of course, to a presentation like this, which is basically a bigger scale of that table where you start with in year 1. So I guess it starts already at the start of the academy, this focus of presenting something, research, translation into something to present on a table. So yeah.
Definitely. No, I think the the idea of using the graduation show as a laboratory for thinking about new forms of representation would be a very interesting topic, and I think we're really only at the very beginning of that. I mean, compared to many other exhibitions of this kind, I think that spaces like this arena are an important start, but obviously as the continual shift in emphasis of projects continues, we shouldn't ossify around this particular model, and it should be really continued to push forward. So I think that would be in itself a really interesting discussion for a more extended reflection. But maybe we can go on to the second question regarding the canons, and how do canons and traditions in design education impact contemporary practice in design? And maybe that's an opportunity for you, Maxime, to say a few words about your project and how things are going up on the top floor.
Yeah. Well, this question of the canons was actually the subject of my research, because before engaging with the master, I've done my bachelor at the academy also a couple of years ago. And I've worked as a social designer and design researcher, but I realized that there were some mechanisms in the way social design would be discussed, presented, or communicated also, with which I was actually very uncomfortable. And so I just started to look at where those come from, and eventually it led me to look into design history and into how within the narratives of design history we still have canons that are in place very stiffly, and which come to condition the new practices that we've had developing in the field over the past few decades, such as social design, design research, critical design, and so on. But despite the fact that these new practices were addressing some of the problematics that, or trying to challenge some of the problematics of the more traditional silos of the design field, they are still being taught through the history that forms those silos. So to me, it seems that it's quite crucial to question those canons and those traditions, because to this day they still condition a lot the way we educate, we practice, and we understand the field of design. And that needs to be challenged in many ways.
Absolutely, and I think your aphorism here about licking the behind of modernists is particularly poignant, because it's something that is generally done unwittingly, without a lot of, it's almost like a default, a canon is something that's so deeply embedded in the academic consciousness that it's difficult to even address it as a question, because it's taken for granted as it is. And certainly thinking about my own education, it was really like central, the presentation of certain figures as there to be venerated and not to be questioned, I think is something that gives me hope that another generation is capable of doing that, capable of upholding some of this, of challenging some of these sort of pillars of contemporary culture, and to look for alternative canons. And so my question would be, has part of your research somehow reflected on how, obviously not what those canons are, because that's like a much bigger question, but how they can be identified and what can be done to somehow pull them, drag them in? And then maybe, Kay, that's also something interesting here, also from the perspective of a tutor, of somebody who's actually actively engaged in the educational process.
Well, in my research, of course, I tried to identify some of those canons and to unfold what are the consequences of those, and how do they still condition the culture of design nowadays. But of course, it's also like, it's something that I do from my experience of the field and of the education that I've had. So it's also, I'm quite aware that it's a limited scope, and that in many manners, and that's how I finished my thesis, it's that in many ways there are a lot of more canons that I haven't identified or seen that are also conditioning me still to this day and in the way I verbalize and formulate my critique. And in that sense, I think it's that's something that calls for a collective work, and not only from a theoretical point of view or not only from a practical point of view, but also like bringing practice and theory, because in design they are very much separated. That's also the case in education at Design Academy. There is a very big gap. Theory of design and design history are a little bit part of the program, but they are not one of the main one of the pillars, at least. And I think it's very necessary to collectively, like, in order to have different points of view, different experiences, different points of views, looking at this, and so that we can start to unpack a little bit the problematics that are part of those narratives.
I'm wondering if you say collectively, what do you mean? Who's the collective?
Well, in the text I have upstairs for the visitor, I finish it with just borrowing the words from a professor who I really respect, who is Jean Casimir. And in his work, he's always calling, or he's inviting people to form coalitions between theory and practice. Yeah. So this idea that right now, at this moment, I'm working with some designers, for instance, who are very much concerned with their practice. And together we talk a little bit about theory and how to position their practice, for instance. And on the other hand, I'm also involved in a seminar in a university where they, 2 weeks ago, they talked about creating an observatory of design. So there is really this idea of almost taking binoculars and looking from afar. Yeah. But if you start to create space where the two meet and inform each other, I think it could be very valuable, because what you find in design theory and history is that historians have no clue about what's going on in the practice nowadays, and therefore they continue perpetuating the same narrative, and that's the case with contemporary historians, be it Beatriz Colomina, who came last year at the Academy, or Alexandra Midal in Switzerland, also, who recently published a book which brings again some of the similar narratives. And at the same time, in the design practice, there are lots of experiments that are being done, but that are totally disconnected from any theoretical or historical construct, which makes it very difficult to make steps further in elaborating it in a stronger construct, should it be a stronger construct.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, I think responding from my perspective as being a tutor, so I'm not a tutor from design theory, so I'm really, I'm a tutor from the practical side. Let's say I teach time-based media, so I work with video, performance and sound. But I agree with your remark about the fact that they're quite separate, and also there's a really different approach. So let's say the theoretical approach is input based, so a tutor has a PowerPoint presentation and just shows a lot of examples. And then there's, of course, the question, what are those examples? So that's now really something we have to talk about. Like, is 99% of those examples white and male, and well, a lot of things you probably researched. Mm-hmm. So that is one really important part. And then I think the gap between that, yeah, that's a little bit about the structure of education. I think that tutor-centered learning is something, of course, which my idea is that we have to open that up, and that most of the theoretical approach is still really tutor-centered. Like, I will show you a lot of examples, and these are my reference.
Aspect, something that I've highly enjoyed, at least, and correct me if you think that I'm wrong, but in the Critical Inquiry Lab, we had the opportunity to deal with very theoretical subjects and conceptual and focused on research, at least, but it would not necessarily be that the tutor or the guest workshop facilitator would be coming to lecture to us. It was more like invitations to reflect on certain topics, and with a certain maybe corpus of documents or text on which we would reflect, but on which we will also come to with our own references. And in that sense, I don't think that theory necessarily has to be in an auditorium in front of a screen with a lecture, but it can be also a collective practice of reading, of debating, and in that sense, there are many opportunities to bring, and that's something I was talking about at some point, like the work of theory and history as a practice and not as a theory.
To quickly respond to that, one thing you also mentioned is that then on the other side, the practical part of design is sometimes separate from the theoretical, and that's something I also notice with students that, for instance, it's quite hard to come up with a research question. So where it's not about like researching as if you are studying like only theory, but how can you make that research part of your practice? And that's, I think, where there's also space for really interesting things to happen, but it's not yet happening that much, I feel. So also like how to formulate a research question which you kind of research through your practice. I think that's where it becomes interesting.
I think there's also reason for hope in the sense that when I was a student, of course, Mies van der Rohe was upheld as probably the sort of archetypal heroic model, one that was a constant point of reference in every level, from representation to construction, finished project, to composition, to drawing, to everything. And if you think about last year, I think the most commented book was Low Tech, Julia Watson's investigation of indigenous architectural strategies, and it caused a lot of discussion. There were many conferences and debates around this, and I think that there is gradually a shift, at least in recognition. The question is, how does then that somehow precipitate into what is professional activity? And I think that's, again, another whole topic that would be very interesting to discuss, how, because academic environments are to some extent a bubble, and then, of course, after that, there's a much more complex challenge, which is bringing all of these things into some sort of more tangible fruition within the context of an aggressively hyper-driven market economy, which has very little space for these kind of considerations. But to move on to the third question, I wanted to introduce this topic of the role within the kind of academic environment of pop culture, and of how this can somehow take a role for in becoming somehow a vector or a transmission of knowledge. And maybe Julia would like to, maybe we can move on to the next slides and talk a little bit about this in relation to the project.
Yeah, I think that for me, this idea of seeking refuge in popular culture also comes from this exhaustion of certain discourses that we've been taught and being part of throughout our whole academic lives. And I think it's important because I believe that there is definitely certain interest in bringing the importance and relevance of popular culture back to a more reflection-based discourse or practices, but at the same time, that also happens in like niche practices, like probably the Design Academy or some others. I think it's interesting because popular culture is something that maybe someone is unconsciously tied to, or even is often a passive, let's say, audience when perceiving it. At the same time, it is a big part of what creates our imagery, since probably we're very little until, throughout our whole lives. And I often think it's very disregarded in academic discourses because it's seen as something that, as a mass culture, as something that, to a certain extent, everyone can relate to, but as a commentator more than and analyzing it. And that sometimes gives it, if everyone can talk about it, it's not that interesting, or it doesn't, kind of create that academic interest in it. But through my research, and my project was very based on animation and this idea of accessibility towards different types of the versions of popular culture, which in my case is this anime, and the translation processes it carried out throughout the years, and how globalized pop culture ended up being part of, through the translations, have ended up being part of my own imagery. And I'm from the Basque Country, and being able to experience all this, globalized material in my own language definitely led me to have partly the interest that I have nowadays. So it is interesting to think of this idea of accessibility, because it's also that it draws a line between an academic practice which is probably not accessible for everyone because of economic reasons, geographical, cultural, etc., whereas popular culture in a really wide and broad spectrum of what it means, it does touch, at least in the Western world, to many people. And yeah, this of course can lead to many subtopics as the idea of commons and accessibility, and how this popular culture is experienced. Is it as a passive subject, or is it a bit more active, or is there an active reflection, which I think that's where the connection I wanted to make, or I think that it's interesting to make with academic institutions, is like to acknowledge the importance of these other not academic platforms or ways of sharing, expanding, and even generating knowledge can be analyzed and even intervened, because that's something I think it's very interesting that, when we're generating all these outcomes and thinking of, do you stay only on a symbolic level? Do you want it to make it practical? Do you want it to have some sort of, is it an action? Is it aimed towards an audience to actually generate something, even if it's a discussion, even if it's so yeah, I think it's interesting to see how academia deals with all this other spectrum of knowledge sharing too.
Yeah, please.
So did you make an animation, or you reflected on?
No, so the project is based on this anime called Sakura. There is a very glitchy image of it, and I focused on the translation phases of this anime and how anime has become this like symbol of Japanese animation, but also very globalized popular culture, and how this has arrived to me on a personal level, which was through these translations. And nowadays I was not having access to these translation works or access to this material on the way I experience it, in this case when I was a kid, and where I was only fluent in Basque. And then this of course leads you to this whole idea of how do you access this popular culture? Is it through public institutions, which was originally the case of this animation, but nowadays finding it impossible because of copyright reasons and ownership, etc., and having to analyze and understand how other sorts of knowledge sharing or culture sharing platforms work, as shadow libraries and bootlegging, which is what led me to the project of being able to find it, but in a very distorted and damaged way, and to understand how this has evolved during the years, this degradation, this digital degradation also being a cultural degradation in a sense.
And if you relate it to the academy, maybe this is a bit a question for everyone. Would it be that you can bring pop culture into the academy, but then it's more the question, how do you bring it also back to the context of pop culture? Is that also something you're...
In my case, my exercise, which I think there might be yeah, a million ways of approaching such a question. In my case, it was an exercise of trying to reconstruct this script and understand how also the language had evolved, but the content itself had evolved for me, and to get to these meanings, and then just putting it back.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think it might be interesting to start seeing the academic field as a space where this kind of topics can be reflected on, but also actively worked on, which, and then exactly how do you bring back to a broader audience, because we are very used to talk in this very specific jargon, and I think popular culture and those platforms do give you an option to at least make the discourse more accessible. Exactly, yeah.
I was just, if I may add, can I hear? I was just wondering, since I would see the design field or the design academia as the academia which is most tied to pop culture, in a sense, since, I mean, anime is made by designers who are scribbling, and I was just wondering if it's then rather the question of who do we work for in the end, and for whom do we communicate? Do we communicate for an academic background person who understand those huge terms we are throwing easily around us, or is it for people who are coming from outside, who are visiting graduation show in 2 hours and have 5 minutes for a project to engage and to kind of grasp on what we're talking about? I think for me it is rather about how we communicate and for whom, and what are our personal motivations to bridge outside of our own bubble and our own background. And I think for design has, for me at least, the capability to do that in a sense, because for me design is communication, and communicating means communicating to other people who might not have similar ideas or backgrounds. So aren't we those who are most capable to be able to find a way to talk through pop culture, if it is, or through other medium, to bridge that?
But I think then it also goes back to this idea of a pre-established setup of how to exhibit stuff and how do you, reach certain audiences. If I'm talking about popular culture, but I'm like only gonna exhibit, or I'm only gonna open up this discourse for a week, that leads to nowhere.
That's true.
So I think that's also the point. I mean, and it's a personal decision. Where do you want to bring this research, and how do you want to, if I'm reconstructing the script of an anime episode in Basque, probably my parents are the only ones can understand it here this week, which, also highlights even more this idea of where are you presenting and for whom are you're presenting all these things. And then also having a personal motivation to bring that to a broader audience and geographical context. So in my case, it's definitely going to be an attempt that I'm willing to make, but yeah, I would like to think that everyone is also willing to think a bit further than this week.
Maybe to Maxime. Yeah, to react on your point, Evalota, I think it's good to remember that design is a very bourgeois culture also, at least from where it comes from. And few days last week, I was talking with a graduate from social design who has her work downstairs, Juliette. And before doing social design, she was educated as a graphic designer. And while working within the master as a social designer, she had to fight with her own background education and with some of the tutors also to put in place like specific visual language that would be that would be easily approachable for people. And like we can say that design is part of the way we communicate and so on, but it remains very enclosed in a bourgeois bubble that does not necessarily relate to this idea of connecting with everyone.
I agree, but there's a bourgeois part of design, and then there's a part of design where I was educated in, which was communications design and graphic design, where the first step was the step into an advertisement agency, which I would say is the design which most people outside of academia and bourgeois design culture know, which is that they see on TV and on their phones, which is pop culture to me.
And so I came from the non-bourgeois context and stepped into maybe the bourgeois context, if I may say that. So it's another way around, and both worlds existing, and then there's the question of where is more influence. And for me, this world here is way smaller than the world in advertisement, for instance. So it's just a matter of really trying to figure out where you want to communicate towards, I think.
There's also, I get piss taken out of me quite a bit for going on about this being the school where we're designing design. But I repeat it once again in the sense that I think that part of our role here is to also be taking certain things that maybe are discounted or discarded or pushed aside and actually shining a light on how these can be a site of knowledge, a place where we're really actually is possible to identify the spirit of a certain moment and then working on those. And I think that this is really part of the problem, is that there is no sort of collective recognition of many of the things that are associated with pop culture. I'm thinking about myself and seeing my daughter on YouTube and some of the stuff that she watches and going through that natural process of rejecting, just as my parents did with me playing video games, that as a completely useless, time-wasting activity. And then thinking about how video games shape my own practice so much as really a kind of a place of encounter, and this was before the internet and anything, but so formative. It's partly having this open-mindedness, and I think that's really about what, in the best possible circumstances, an academic environment can and should be a place where all of your preconceptions are blown away and you are open-minded, and that's what I think projects like yours are fantastic. One of the reasons they're fantastic is that they do invite us collectively to look with new eyes at certain languages that we had completely disregarded. But I want to go on to the fourth question before we run out of time, which is, how can we facilitate an educational environment inclusive enough to withstand the mediation of openness and closure, of assertiveness and fluidity? Eva, maybe you'd like to tell us a bit about your project.
I'm happy to. So as you see on the pictures, I worked with slime, and I also brought some slime, which Michael is kind enough to pass around now. Yeah, so my installation is basically based on 2 tables. So I brought a table into the exhibit on which I invite people to connect through the medium of slime. So I came towards this by researching about solid manifestations of thoughts, which I, as an example, use conspiracy theories for. So it's a bit outside the design educational realm. But I then kind of came to the urgency of trying to figure out a way how to counter these solid manifestations. And while realizing that to a certain extent we also need this solidity, these safeties and certainties to kind of orientate ourselves in the outside world and to get a form of safety from them. So I try to find a medium which is in between the solid and the fluid, which is kind of working against the solid captification while giving into the need to have some form of protection from the washing away fluid, I called it. So the slime is a mediation material, and on my 2 tables in the installation, I asked people to define their position through the medium of slime by finding different ingredients and watch their own boundaries interact with the different colors. And then on the second note, share their positions on the second table, where they then are watching how their own boundaries are interacting with other people's boundaries, and kind of in a sense of that they are mediating with others in the public. And also with the connotation that as soon as you make your own position public, you're always forced to connect to others, so that you shouldn't neglect or isolate yourself in your thoughts. So that's my installation here.
And how can you, going back to this question of academic platforms and standards of knowledge, where we started out from, how can, I mean, this is like it's a dispositif, it's a device through which relationships are created or questioned. How do you think something like this, and thinking in very also bringing it down to the reality of this very painful and difficult and challenging process of disseminating knowledge. How can something like this be reflected in an academic environment as we know them today?
Well, what I came towards my own conclusion is that to a certain extent you always have to find a base in between well, what was and what will be. And when we spoke about the pillars of and the canons of design, or those table we exhibit in the end, I think, to a certain extent you have to learn, and then you can criticize what you've learned before. So for me it's a mediation between generations and a mediation between bubbles of finding, of learning from each other, of having both sides being influenceable and being able to pull back a little bit, but also reach out and forward with with their positions or their interests. So it's for me it is about finding what was and then being able to criticize that in conversation with those who still appreciate what was. And for that I find that if you reflect upon your own position in this context, reflect upon your own uncertainties or questions, then you kind of become this in-between state, and through being maybe a little bit more open, maybe you can invite others to share that openness with you.
And do you think that playfulness has something to do with the process? Or maybe playfulness?
I think playfulness is
and breaking the boundaries.
Yeah, I think it's a huge part, because playfulness always kind of speaks about some form of feeling safe, because you can only play if you feel safe, and you can only experiment with your own thoughts if you feel safe. So it's really a matter of creating a space where people feel safe enough to transform themselves in their in-between state, and then through that connect.
Maxime, how's it going over there?
From the beginning of the project of Evalot, I've had difficulties with the slime, so I'm trying to push this a bit away. But I think it's interesting, this notion of play also, because it allows to go away from the serious, the heaviness sometimes of things. And that was also, for instance, one aspect that I used in my project with these just silly origami rhinoceroses, which look really childish and light-hearted, and where sometimes it can be really useful also to address some of the serious topics or heavy topics in a bit of a more, I wouldn't say humane, but something a bit less cold and distant. And I think the playfulness of the slime does that. It sort of diverts a bit the attention towards something else and allows to find different routes to reach discussing a certain subject, which can be really valuable.
I think we're drawing close to the conclusion of this panel, but if there's one urgent and also brief question or intervention from the audience, we're happy to take it. Is anybody jumping up on their seats? Not right now? Okay, so with that I think we need to hand over the stage back for the next performance. Thank you all. Thank you to Kay, Maxime, Emma, Julia, Eva. Thank you for being here.